All right, everybody, we're back live on psn-radio.com. This is Inside the Jackal's Head, and like I promised, we're back with our guest of the evening, the psychic lawyer himself, Mr. Mark Anthony. Welcome to the show, sir. It's long overdue, and I'm so happy to have you finally on the show here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I've been excited about doing this, and to all the listeners, hello.
Now, speaking of all the listeners who might, recognize your name but might not know you from your work itself, because you have a famous name, Mark Anthony. Not to be confused with the Latin lover, Mark Anthony.
The Latin lover or Cleopatra,
Yeah,
it's
funny. Confused with those guys.
It's like between Cleopatra and J-Lo, everybody's heard of Mark Anthony,
right.
And so that's a good thing, I guess.
It is. It definitely, I'm sure, helps your SEO.
It does. Well, it was funny. I was going to be on this one radio station one time, and my spot was coming up at top of the hour. So of course you call in ahead of time. And the two DJs, they're on this African-American show, and they were getting ready to go off as the host of the next show was coming on. They go, "Who's on the phone?" "Mark Anthony." And they put me in and go, "Mark Anthony, dude, bro, how is J-Lo?" And I said, "No, I'm the psychic lawyer." They go, "The psych, oh my." And so this whole thing went on, and they were hysterical, and I was telling them all this stuff. And then when it went to the show I was supposed to be on, the host took over from these two other guys. She goes, "Okay, I don't think my introduction can top that. So, Mark, great to have you here." And it was hysterically funny. And the reason that I remember that so well is that was the day that my book, Never Letting Go, had been released. And it was so funny because I was here in Florida, and we were having a tropical storm with 70 mile an hour winds, and all this stuff was going on, and I'm on the radio and all, and it's one of those memorable times that was hysterically funny, and yet could have been a total natural disaster. So, but in the end, everything worked out fine.
You're definitely a positive person, so I'm pretty sure that helped out also. Stay positive.
Well, after 14 hurricanes, 2 tornadoes, you kind of develop...
You're positive about everything. Nothing can hurt you, right?
Well, you develop a healthy respect for Mother Nature, that's for sure.
Now, what part of Florida are you from, Mark? Because I'm down here in Miami myself.
Okay, I'm in Central Florida, in the Orlando area, and
gotcha.
Florida is a great place. Although this time of year it is, we call it the 3 H's. It's either hot and humid, or it's always hot and humid, or it's a hurricane. Yes. And I'll take the hot and humid over the hurricane.
Yeah, well, we haven't really had a bad hurricane in quite a bit. I mean, at least here in Miami. I mean, Orlando's been hit a little bit here and there with storms, but nothing like Andrew. Remember Andrew in '92? That was bad.
Yeah, I remember Andrew because I live on the coast, and we had to evacuate because they weren't sure if it was going to hit. But in 2004, we got hit by Hurricane Francis, then Hurricane Jean within 3 weeks of each other, and the place was absolutely devastated. I mean, power was knocked out, the infrastructure was down, and with all due respect to our brothers and sisters in New Orleans, we didn't attack the police and the National Guard and loot things.
Right.
We were kind of like working with them, and how I was helping my neighbors put tarps on their roof, and I think that we have to learn a lesson from that in difficult times we need to pull together and not treat the services that are coming to help us as the enemy, because they're not.
Yeah, no, it's true. It really is true. I saw it firsthand when Andrew hit down here in Miami. I was here during Hurricane Andrew, and while there were no looting and nothing like that, but you could see the distinct between the regular civilians and the police officers who were trying to help, military folks who were trying to help, and just that, like, I don't know, that inbred hatred towards authority.
Yeah,
which is the weirdest thing.
It's very strange. It's like there's this undercurrent that is kept in check by superior force, and as soon as the force is removed, then all of a sudden it sort of erupts. Right. And and I know that we're going off on a tangent on that, but that is something too that we need to look at in our own spiritual nature. And there's the unending balance between the ego and the spirit, and the ego can also be termed as animalistic impulses.
Yes,
it's the rage, the jealousy, the predatorial. There's a reason that we have self-control. That if you sit down in a restaurant and look at what somebody's next to you is eating, and it looks better than what you're eating, that you don't reach over and grab the steak off their plate and start, eating it. Okay, and I know it's kind of an extreme example, but that is the great spiritual test that we go through all the time. And when you see on a mass scale that people just go insane as soon as authority figures are removed, it's very sad, I think.
How much of that do you think, Mark? And I know this is way off what we're going to talk about here when it comes to the psychic stuff, but how much do you think of that is kind of a manifestation of just an anger towards society the way it is by people that are lower class, more than anything else. Like poor people, I'm pretty sure are pretty upset when it comes to to government because they're poor and they want to have money, and there's always that distinction between the classes. But how much do you think that has been like breeding during the last few decades, where the poor class of society are so just distraught and just hate government so much that it's kind of bleeding over now to other classes, because now even middle class America kind of hates police, and we're seeing more and more like hatreds for law officers and court system and stuff, and it's like bleeding all over the country. Even like rich people are showing their disdain for officers now, which you never saw that before.
I think it's always been there. If you look at the old black and white movies of the 1930s, and you see Charlie Chaplin and the Marx Brothers and Laurel and Hardy, and that, you always see people that are comical are making fun of the upper class and of authority figures. And
Right.
I remember reading about J. Edgar Hoover, who was the ultimate authority figure and head
No
of the
kidding.
FBI, and he liked rubbing elbows with people in Hollywood so that he could gather information on them and sort of blackmail them. I mean, this was a very common. We could do a whole show just on J. Edgar Hoover, and he was having dinner, and Charlie Chaplin was at the table, and Chaplin made some negative comments and made fun of the government, and Hoover took exception, and Charlie Chaplin basically said, well, the little guy always likes watching the upper classes get kicked in the butt. Well, interestingly enough, in the coming years, then Charlie Chaplin was accused of being a communist, and of course J.
Yeah.
Edgar Hoover was behind that, and he actually left the country for several years and went to go live in France. So there's nothing new about this. I think that there's always been class envy, and there's always been a resentment of authority, the unending struggle or conflict between the haves and the have-nots. And I don't think it's just so simplistic as, oh, I'm jealous of somebody. I think that jealousy at times may be you can take a lemon and turn it into lemonade. Instead of saying, I am jealous because that person is rich, how about looking at them and saying, I'm jealous that that person is rich, but she did it by working really hard and coming up with an innovative idea that made a lot of money. So
Right.
instead of wishing ill upon that person, how about being inspired and motivated by it?
Right.
I've had people say to me, in my practice of law, oh, well, you're just one of those rich lawyers. And it's like, yeah, well, when I graduated law school, okay, nobody handed me a trust fund along with my degree. I
Yeah.
graduated penniless and up to my ears in student loans, all of which I paid off. Okay, and people, instead of wanting to tear me down, what I would say to them is, why don't you get inspired and take whatever skill set you have and use it to your best ability? Because we all have a skill set. Some people are great athletes, some people are great mechanics, some people are great mathematicians, some people are creative, and you take that, we all have gifts from God, and you take that gift from God and you use it to your best ability, and then you're doing the right thing, and you don't worry about what other people are doing or what their material success is. You focus on what you're doing and be the best that you can at what you do.
Now you have an extraordinary gift, Could be from God. Could be from any being that created everything. Your ability to read people and speak to the afterlife, to speak to spirits, is something that amazes me because I've never seen a ghost. I've never been able to speak to a spirit, but I've always been fascinated with that subject. And just to close what we're talking about here with the authority figures, it is funny how psychically I think it's a universal language, Mark, that no matter what hate there is for authorities, when the number one person that people call for whenever they're in trouble is the police, regardless of who they are, what class they are. They always go back and revert back to calling the cops when they're in need. So no matter how much you hate them, you need them.
And
But
it is interesting, too, that people who claim they are atheists, when everything has crumbled and fallen around them, all too often they turn to God.
right.
There's an old saying in the military, there are no atheists in foxholes.
That's true. It's funny that you say that. I've known a couple of atheists. I'm atheist myself, just to get that out of the way real quick. But I'm atheist kind of with a little bit of an open mind, and I'll explain to you what I mean by that. I've known like strict atheists who just don't believe in anything. And I've known a couple of them who were very sick. One of them passed away. And the moment that he was getting very, very sick from brain cancer, he found God. Ironically enough, as he was nearing death, he started believing, and next thing you know, he had a Bible and he was reading, and he found his God.
Well,
And it does happen a lot.
it brought him comfort. And
It did, yeah.
well, there's a big difference between God and religion, and what a lot of self-proclaimed atheists do is they get the two confused. Because I know a lot of people that are angry at religions,
Right.
the way they've been treated. Because so many religions are fear-based. You're bad, you're bad, you're bad. We're sinners, we're
yeah.
sinners, we're sinners. My way is the only way. There's only one way. It's like, right, okay, so we're believing in this infinite being which transcends time and space and is a multi-dimensional being that's a vast intelligence and creative network throughout the entire universe. And there's only one way to obtain union with this being, and that's through the First Church of the ultra right wing on Yeehaw Road in Goofball Junction. And really, and I don't mean to be insulting or demeaning to people's religions, but you have to realize that God exists in spite of religion, not because of religion, and that religions are merely a path to God. And I like to quote the late Beatle George Harrison, a very spiritual man. And
Yes.
I quoted him on this in my book, Never Letting Go. He said that all religions are branches of one big tree, and it doesn't matter what you call God, just so long as you call.
Right. And that's where I stand. I'm one of these atheists. This is what I mean with it when I said I have a little bit of an open mind, even though I am atheist. My anger is towards religion and the lies and fallacies of religion itself, not so much with Big G himself or itself or whatever that might be. I just have a problem with any religion who says, "Oh, God loves you and God's all loving," but if you don't believe in Him, you're going to burn in hell. That to me just stands wrong. That's just a problem.
Well,
I
look
have
what
with
that
religion.
filthy organization in Iraq, ISIS, is doing.
Oh, geez.
Okay, I mean, they give. They're so extreme that even Al Qaeda kicked them out.
Yes.
Seriously, I mean, this is how bad they are. I mean, it's like, wow, you're so bad, even the devil kicked you out of hell.
Yeah.
And the thing is, not only is it that you have to convert to Islam, you have to convert to their version of Islam. And in the last month, aside from killing thousands of people and recently burying non-Muslims alive, which is just horrific, they have destroyed priceless archaeological sites and treasures because they didn't conform to Islam. They destroyed these beautiful Assyrian statues of these winged lions. They blew up the tomb of the prophet Jonah, a.k.a. Jonah, who supposedly was swallowed by the big fish or whale or whatever it was in the Old Testament. And they're just going around destroying world heritage cultural sites, and they're doing this in the name of God. And they're not doing it in the name of God. They're doing it out of barbarism and
Right.
ego and a
Yep.
politically driven agenda. And that's the problem with religions. And then
Hmm.
you get in this country, it's fascinating because I'm also a legal analyst, and I'm called upon to do a lot of analysis on high profile cases and situations. I mean, you look at these alleged Christians who are turned who Jesus talked about being full of love and peace and understanding and not judging your neighbor. Okay, and you get these people who say they're Christians and they're anything but. They're hateful, they're judgmental. The whole gay marriage debate is bringing out the ugliest
No kidding.
aspects
Yep.
of religious fanatics. And the thing is, there's a big difference between a Christian and a religious fanatic. When you get the
Yes.
people that say, this is bad, God hates this, God hates that, God hates everyone that I hate, well, that's not a Christian, that's a religious fanatic, because I don't ever recall reading where Jesus said, well, I hate these people and they're too filthy and beneath me to seek or to be worthy of my love and my help. And it's something Gandhi said that I've always admired. He said, I like your Christ, but I don't like you Christians because you don't act like your Christ. And what I like about Pope Francis, and it's funny because he recently visited an evangelical church in Italy, and immediately I was reading the thousands of comments by evangelicals saying he's not a Christian, he's a heretic, he's the Antichrist, he's evil, he's this. And I'm thinking, wow, you're really making Gandhi's point, aren't you? Because here you have the leader of the Catholic Church reaching out to other religions with the hand of friendship, and you guys are all casting the first stone. And so this is where religion goes wrong, and this is where a lot of people, and I might suggest, respectfully, yourself, where people have been wronged and humiliated and said that you're bad. I mean, as a medium, I mean, I have to, we get emails all day long from these people. You're going to burn in hell, and you're going to this, and you're going to that, and the book of Deuteronomy this, and the book of Leviticus that. And it's like, yeah, well, I'm sorry, but I don't subscribe to primitive Bronze Age superstitious
Yes.
nonsense.
And that's really all it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly his book of religious nonsense. It really is, and it's amazing how many times or how many generations have been brainwashed over the last 2,000 years. Talking about 2,000 years worth of brainwashing that they were talking about Christianity. I mean, this religion goes back thousands of years even before that. So I mean, it's amazing how easily religion has won over the populace and brainwashed the masses over the last 4 or 5 thousand years, isn't it?
Well, yet through it all, the
It's that
people.
it's that need though, isn't it, Mark? That need to like at least
It's a need
know
to
that.
connect. It's a need to connect with God. God being
Right.
an infinity, and people put a humanoid, or a relatable face on it. But what happens is, through all of the despicable behavior of religious fanatics, the true light does still shine. That we must love one another as we love ourselves. We must treat other people the way we want to be treated.
Hmm.
That peace and love and understanding are the cornerstones of true spirituality. And when you look at the roots of all the great religions, they're all basically saying that. What happens is when you get self-appointed religious and political leaders who are looking for a moral justification for their own ego-driven agendas. Well, if you say, well, we need to fly planes into buildings and kill people because I disagree with the U.S. foreign policy in Israel, you don't get a whole lot of volunteers. But when it turns into God wants us to do that, and if you do this, then you are rewarded with, a massage parlor in heaven.
72 virgins. Go for
72 virgins, which,
it. By the way, the big
it's
the
just
big
how
misconception
stupid
there is yeah, but
it's,
here's the big misconception is the 72 virgins were the other people that bombed themselves before you bombed yourself.
Yeah.
So they're all guys, basically. All the virgins are guys. Just
Well, I
are
was
waiting for you.
hoping. Well, I shouldn't say this to be terribly politically incorrect, but anyway, it's just it's ridiculous when people are gullible enough to believe that. But
Yeah.
religion has been used to justify the most horrific things imaginable. But that's not God. That's the human ego which edges God out. And so when the human ego is the driving force of a political or religious leader, and they need quote unquote a moral justification for their behaviors. Well, of course, you always turn to God is with us. I mean,
Right.
Stalin, a communist Stalin, staunch atheist, but when Nazi Germany invaded Soviet Russia, all of a sudden they're passing out the Bibles, and Stalin makes this incredible speech, the Holy Mother Russia speech, which had religious overtones. So it's interesting how the communist atheist suddenly jumped on the religious bandwagon to rally his people. Ironically, the Nazis also had a saying "God with us." So, if
United States also in the dollar bill. In God we trust.
God
God.
trust, yes.
And even sports teams, like the winning team always thanks God. You never see like the losing team saying, God just doesn't like us. They like the other team better. You never hear that, but the winning team is always thanking God. Oh, God's with us. God loves her. It's funny, it took thousands of years for God to pick a sports team. That's really what it is sometimes. That's what it feels like. Whenever I hear like the Yankees after they win the World Series, oh, God, it's because of God. Really said God's a Yankee fan. That's what you're trying to tell me.
Well, perhaps maybe they're thanking God for the beautiful gift of athletic prowess that they've been given, and I don't know. I don't know.
I do like the fact though that you're like me in a sense. You could separate religion and God and look at it as two completely separate things. Religion has been nothing but brainwashing for, like I said, thousands of years. Now, I do believe that there is an organization within the cosmos, some kind of entity that controls everything, that created everything, what was there before the Big Bang, for example. But I do believe in evolution as well, which is kind of a weird combination. So I know
I,
you're
I,
either a
I,
believer in evolution or you're a believer in
and
creationism,
I don't. I see. Actually,
for
it was
whatever reason.
it was the Catholic Church that first put forth the Big Bang theory back in 1926.
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
Well, because the Catholic Church has, in many ways, always looked at the Bible as teaching largely in metaphor, and
Right.
so 7 days for God could be billions of years in our terms. It's like when people take
Right.
it literally, it's like, I don't want to get off on that. It just, that's just silly. But the thing is, I've never seen a conflict between the Big Bang, between creationism and evolution, because the universe is not a static place.
Right.
Things are always changing and evolving and growing. And I don't believe that God would create something that was just static, because if that were the case, then dinosaurs would still be roaming the earth and nothing would ever change. And our
Right.
planet's constantly changing and evolving. And the study of cosmology and the universe shows us that the universe, too, I mean, stars explode and, planets come and go. And eventually we're going to come and go. And that's all seems to be part of it. And interesting is, if you look at Hinduism talks about there's the creation, the sustaining of the universe, and then the destruction, and then a recycling of that. And the
Right.
Hindu attitude is that if our world is destroyed, so what? Because another one will form and we all come back and we'll start a new cycle. And I've always found Hinduism very fascinating in that respect. When you get into the philosophical and the way they look at energy and the cycle of recreation, I think where they get kind of bogged down to is in their own mythology, and you can't do this and you can't do this and so on and so forth.
Now, I don't know if you're on the same I would say, page with who the Jesus figure was in history, as I am, and what we've talked about on this show in the past. I'm pretty sure you haven't heard some of the guests I've had on the subject and before, but one of the topics with Jesus is that he spent some of the missing years studying with Hindus, or with the Hindu religion, studying with Buddhist monks, and a lot of the teachings that Jesus implemented later on were directly lifted from them, especially stuff of the afterlife and stuff like that. Now, if that is the case, and that is the truth, and wouldn't most of the credit for even Christianity come really because of the Buddhist religion?
It very well could, but see, one thing that a lot of those people gloss over, because I've read books on that subject, and
Mm,
supposedly in a Tibetan monastery, there's
right,
references of a Saint Issa,
right.
who came from the West. A lot of people gloss over the certain stories in the Bible. And when Herod the Great went crazy and wanted to slaughter all the infants where Jesus had been born, and they fled to the land of Egypt, then the next thing you know, all right, Jesus is back in Jerusalem after the death of Herod the Great. Well, the most likely place for Joseph to have taken Mary and Jesus would have been Alexandria, Egypt. And at that time, Alexandria was the center of world commerce in the Mediterranean. It was a
Mm,
city larger than Rome. It was the intellectual, financial, and cultural center, and it brought together Asia, Africa, and Europe. And not only that, but 20% of the population of Alexandria was Jewish. In fact, it was like the largest Jewish cosmopolitan concentration outside of Jerusalem. Well, it was essentially the Manhattan of the day. So now we have a young Jewish boy brought by his parents into a city. They would have blended right in, of course, because 200,000 people at least would have been Jewish. So Jesus would have grown up in an environment where he would have been exposed to the first-rate Jewish scholars of the day, plus the Greeks who'd been in Egypt since the conquest by Alexander the Great, plus the Romans who'd been there for the last 50 years, plus the Egyptians who, and their religion who'd been there for the prior 3,000 years. And there were also Hindu temples in Alexandria because over 120 ships per year sailed from Egypt around the Arabian Peninsula to India. And there also were representatives from the court of Persia, so the Persian religion and Zoroastrianism. So let me tell you something. If you had to live in that time, Alexandria was the place to be. And Jesus very well was most likely exposed to all of this intellectual thinking. But people just sort of gloss it over, and maybe he did go to India. It certainly was possible, but even
hmm
if he didn't, he may have had all of that wealth of knowledge right there in Alexandria that helped shape his thinking. We'll never know for sure, but it certainly makes for great intellectual conversation, I think.
Oh, definitely. No, and the story of Jesus itself. Of course, Jesus Christ was not his real name. That's an anointed name. The Christ, Christo means the
Right.
King. His real name is still kind of vague. Isu, Isa, Joshua. There's a lot of different interpretations of what
Well,
the name could be.
in ancient Hebrew, it would have been Yeshua,
Joshua,
and
correct? Yeah.
the thing about Jesus that a lot of people and I was reading something recently about this. One of the myths of Jesus is that he was poor, and of course the Christian story is that he was poor and born in the
Right.
manger and all that. Well, he was a descendant of the house of David through his mother Mary.
Mm.
And that's a lot of influence right then and there. Secondly, Herod the Great and then his son Herod Antipas, okay, were very much paranoid of Jesus. If Herod the Great had the infants killed, well, without turning this into a history lecture, Herod the Great married into his wife's family. They were the royals and basically had everyone executed until he completely took over. A very paranoid guy, very successful politician. Outmaneuvered Cleopatra, then Antony and Cleopatra, sided with them. He was on the losing side, yet still got Octavian Caesar not to crush him. Okay, so this guy was a seasoned politician. Now he hears a descendant of the house of David is born, so of course he would have wanted to eliminate all the competition. Let's fast forward 30 years. Jesus is on trial. The Roman governor says, I don't want to get involved with this, ships him over to Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, who's like, oh no, him again. Well, let me ship him back to Pilate. Okay, we read the Easter story, gloss over all that, but when you start looking at this, Jesus was a political threat to these people because of his lineage. Now, if you want to go farther, Mary Magdalene was not a whore. And in fact, it
No.
doesn't say in the Bible that she was a whore. That was a smear campaign hundreds of years later when women, their position was demoted in the church. And there's a lot of people and scholars who believe that Mary Magdalene was a descendant of the house of Benjamin. Okay, so we have two very prominent Jewish families, a member of the house of Benjamin and a member of the house of David. Well,
I'm gonna throw a monkey wrench in this story for a second because
sure.
there's another story of Jesus, his origin, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with. And the origin is that the Jesus, or the figure that was created, the Jesus figure created by the church, was used and created based on, and I know this is a name that you kind of brought up, Caesar Caesarion. Are you familiar with this story at all?
Um, you mean Cleopatra's son?
Cleopatra and Julius Caesar's son.
Yeah,
Caesar Caesarion. Okay,
yeah.
the story is very similar. There's a Mary Magdalene also involved. Celine Magdalene is the name of Mary Magdalene in this story. Not only that, this person also, Caesar Caesarion, lived in the same time period as Jesus. Of course, being the son of Julius Caesar, who was killed in battle, his father was elevated to the status of Roman god, so he would be the descendant of a god, or the god of Rome. Being also the son of the queen of Egypt, he is the king of two
Right,
kingdoms, pharaohs
right.
and Roman. And there's a documentary. I'm pretty sure you haven't seen it, but it's called Ring of Power. That
Right.
connects all the dots from where we are today, where we are with the current state of the world, and it goes all the way into the lineage of Jesus and who he was, and it literally connects all the dots. Mark, it's an incredible documentary. It connects every single dot to Caesar Caesarion, Mary Magdalene, the apostles. Everything is connected right back to this person, the son of Julius Caesar, Caesar Caesarion, and it really makes not just a claim, but it makes a claim with evidence and just data proving that this is who Jesus was. And then the rest of the story was kind of lifted from mythology, like Horus's mythology and different things, and put together by the church as a propaganda campaign. I tend to believe that could be very well who he was, because really, how many years passed before the first stories of Jesus came out publicly or were written? Um,
Um,
it
well,
was like a few
about
hundred years later.
no, actually, it was
The
about
first one,
30 to 40 years after the crucifixion. And the only problem with the Caesarean story is that Antony and Cleopatra are defeated in 39 BC. And when Octavian seized Egypt, he had Caesarion murdered. And there's witnesses to
well,
that. And then, hold on, and then Mark Antony's son with his Roman wife was also murdered, Antulus. And then Cleopatra and Mark Antony had three other children.
right.
They had Ptolemy, and then Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, which were raised in
Celine,
Octavian's
right.
household. And then Caligula, who was a descendant of Mark Antony, had one of them strangled. So real nice family here.
Oh yeah.
So the only problem is I can see that, but that one, the archaeological evidence would be strongly against it. I mean, we could get into a debate about this.
I
All
suggest you
night.
watch a documentary. When you see it, you're gonna be like, "Oh my god!" And then you just do your own homework on it, and you're gonna really see the connections and how it all ties in perfectly. I tend to buy that that's who Jesus was. Now, here's the thing with baby Caesarion. I know that there was rumors of his demise, rumors that he was killed, but while there were supposed witnesses, there was never a body. Supposedly, there was never any
He wasn't a
factual
baby.
evidence.
He wasn't a baby. He was
Right.
a teenager when he was murdered.
There were, yeah, but that's the story. But they never provided a body. There was never any proof. And if this person just disappeared for X amount of years and they came back at age 30, from here to then, yeah, they assumed he was dead. and that's where the stories came
Yeah,
from.
but then by the time of the crucifixion, it had been almost 70 years old. So that's why it
Well,
doesn't make
no,
any
yeah, but
sense.
here's the thing: there's no year zero in the calendar. So, and there is actually I would say it's about a good decade, maybe decade and a half between between year one and the previous calendar year, because year zero really there's that gap where we don't even know when year one started, how long ago it was after the crucifixion. So there is that huge gap. It could be a decade, it could be 15 years, it could even be 20 years according to some historians. So that would
Well,
give you the timetable.
actually, there's archaeological evidence of the existence of Pontius Pilate because about 20 years ago in Caesarea, which is a port in what is now Israel, it's in ruins, but there was a monument found with Pontius Pilatus, which is the Latin equivalent of Pontius Pilate, and it dates from the time of the crucifixion. Now, whether or not we can link that Jesus was actually put to death by Pontius Pilate, but the tradition is there. So anyway, we could go
Well,
rant.
we know that crucifixions happen. I mean, that is historically accurate.
Well, sure.
Crucifixions itself happened. Whether Jesus was crucified or not, that's up to you to believe if he was or wasn't, or the story if you want to believe it. I wasn't there, so I couldn't say one way or the other. But if you are a believer, that's fine. But the whole point is that there were crucifixions. We know that for a fact. There's no denying that as a fact. What do you make of, like, say, for example, like the Shroud of Turin?
Actually, I give an entire presentation on the Shroud of Turin, and it is the single most studied object in human history. And what there was the studies in the 1970s, which dated it to around the first century. Then there were the studies in the 1980s, including the carbon-14 analysis, which put it at the Middle Ages. And then last year, the University of Padua did new studies, which they didn't have back in the 80s, which once again put it within 100 years plus or minus of the first century AD. And there's a lot of reasons as to why there could have been the dating for the medieval era. In fact, even the Russians got involved with this. And see, the Shroud of Turin. Good Lord, we could spend hours on this. The Shroud of Turin. There's references to a shroud.
Right.
In the first century, then it reappears in the 6th century. Then supposedly when the Crusaders sacked Constantinople, they're supposed to be helping the Christians, instead they turned on the Greek Christians in 1204, that it was confiscated, and then it emerges, and we have an unbroken line of it in the late 1300s all the way up till today. And the problem is the squabbling between aristocratic French and Italian families, and eventually it ends up in Turin. The Catholic Church refers to it as an artifact. They will not take an official position on it. And the studies of it, I think the Russians said that the imprints on it, and plus the studies at Oxford and at Padua and at the Swiss Institute, they cannot conclude how the images were infused onto the Shroud of Turin. So there's quite a bit of debate, and it certainly is very, very fascinating. So the question is it proof of the resurrection? Is it a medieval forgery? Or let's say it is a burial shroud from the first century, and there is hemoglobin on it. Is that the hemoglobin of Jesus, or was it one of the thousands of people who were crucified during that time? In fact, a more recent theory came up and said that when this body was entombed, there was an earthquake, which according to Scripture there was, and that it could have released radioactive materials which had infused the image on the cloth. I found that one a little bit, stretchy.
That's a little bit of a stretch, yeah.
Yeah, well, but it's interesting.
Actually, the explanation that really took me by surprise came out a few years ago. I think it was in '09, actually, or 08 or '09. Was that the possible image could be that of
Jacques
Da Vinci?
de Moray.
No, Da Vinci.
Yeah, I heard the one about Da Vinci.
There
Yeah,
was even a study by the way, Mark, where they actually showed how he possibly did the image of the Shroud of Turin, and they were able to reproduce on a different material almost the exact same image,
well,
which was pretty incredible. I saw this on a documentary a couple years ago.
Well, that's all fine, well, and good, except Da Vinci lived in the late 1400s to the early 1500s, and there's an unbroken chain of custody of the Shroud of Turin that dates from around 1347. So the Da Vinci story, yes, it's interesting. I don't buy it. Then it was Jacques de Molay, who was the Knights Templar, and these people were like, I've had people write on my Facebook page, well, you know that it's Jacques de Molay, and it's like, yeah, except he was burned at the stake. Um,
Kind of hard to leave an impression of a face with a mustache and
yeah, I
beard.
mean, if it was like an urn full of ashes, I might be persuaded, but
Yeah,
the thing
yeah,
is,
no
the
kidding.
thing is, we'll probably never know. But it's a fascinating mystery. And I like something that Pope Francis said about it. He said, whether or not it is the face of Jesus, what we do see is the face of an anguished man who represents every man and woman who have been beaten down by oppression. And it's like, wow, talk about the Pope really being diplomatic about
No
that.
kidding.
You know,
No kidding.
and it's going on display publicly again next year, and this is something that I very well may go see. That's
Oh,
kind
cool.
of one of the things on my bucket list. I really would like to see the Shroud of Turin. I talked to somebody that saw it. She's a very elderly lady. She's almost 90 years old. She goes, "Yeah, I saw it years ago." Well, I looked at it. I was like, "Oh well, no big deal." I said, yeah, but did you understand it? She goes, yeah, well, I didn't really know, and da 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 da. And I was like, well, God, how can you say it? But then she told me something that was really cool. She said that her husband was a general, and she saw Winston Churchill speak when he was like in his late 80s at West Point. And I'm like, did you? I go, oh my
Wow.
God, that's like, oh my God, And I said, well,
Yeah, that's cool.
how was it? And she said he did the most incredible thing. He was very old, and they stood him up, and he was real shaky, and he walked to the podium, and here he is speaking to the graduating class of West Point. And he said, never give up, never give up, never give up, never give up. Thank you. And he sat down. And she said the crowd went wild. They were cheering. And to think about it, what more did Winston Churchill have to say?
That's it. Yeah, that's it. You don't have anything else to say. That's better than most Oscar speeches right there. That's incredible. I want to talk about your history as a medium before we continue on for the rest of the night and get to calls later. Let's jump into that for a second. How did you get into becoming a psychic medium? How did that start off, and what led you to write the books that you're doing now?
It's a hereditary trait that runs in my family. Both my mother and my father's families are loaded with psychic mediums, and both
For
my mother
centuries, I read, right?
for centuries, and both
Yeah.
my mother and father had. My mother is on the other side. My dad's here with us, and both of them had these abilities. So when I look at it from a clinical standpoint, it's a recessive trait. In other words, a recessive trait is one that shows up maybe every couple generations. It's like being left-handed. That's an inherited trait. Or maybe,
Right.
like in my family, most people have brown eyes, but there's some people that have blue eyes. So that's a rare trait. So when you have two parents that both have a recessive trait, the likelihood of one of the children having that trait is much higher, and that would be me. And so from a very young age, I was able to see spirits, and my parents didn't chastise me about it. They were very understanding, and they just said, don't talk about it outside of the house. And so as I got older and I went to Catholic school, I was kind of being groomed to be a Catholic priest. And I've spent most of my life studying history, archaeology, religion, and then I decided to not go into the clergy, but to go to law instead. Kind of an interesting, interesting
No
jump.
kidding. Yeah, that's a heck of a jump.
One set of rules to another set of rules. I guess the whole rules thing always appealed to me.
You know
And
what, Mark? Not to make a crack here, but there's a lot of priests that could use a good lawyer nowadays.
yeah,
Just
sadly.
saying.
And
Sadly,
what's nice though is it looks like if the church is going to change, it's going to be Pope Francis that makes it happen. And I have my theories on the repressiveness of the church and how that needs to go. But the thing is, in fact, one of my colleagues in law school was a priest, a really nice guy. But I've always been drawn towards the spiritual work and to helping people. And I believe that both my work as a lawyer and as a medium revolve around evidence. Because as a lawyer, obviously, you have to have evidence to prove your case. And as a medium, I have to bring forth evidence that is conveyed to me by a spirit to validate who the spirit is. And there's many ways that a spirit validates his or her identity. It can be through shared memories with the client that I'm reading, through a personality profile, through likes and dislikes of the person when they are alive, or likes and dislikes of the person here. They can give facts and details and things. Sometimes they'll present their names. So there's a lot of things that they can produce. And so that's it in a nutshell.
Now, when you started hearing voices for the first time, how did that go down?
Well, it's four. And when you're four, it's like, da 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 da. Oh, here's my friend.
Right, yeah.
Mom and dad would see them too. And I remember my dad in particular goes, I don't want you doing that. And I got really scared. And I said, I'm sorry. And he goes, well, and then he realized I was afraid. And I remember my mom said, to him, she goes, honey, I think he's like us. And I'm like, what does that mean? And so when I was about 5, Dad sat me down and he said, Mark, I don't want people thinking you're crazy, because crazy people get taken away in straitjackets. Now, there's a reason that he said that to me, because his sister was a very gifted psychic. She could foresee future events. She could see the presence of spirits. And she was married to this guy who, he liked to call himself a Christian. I call him a religious fanatic. And he didn't like her gift. And one day he was going to work, and he worked at Harrison Steel in Pennsylvania. And she told him, she says, I don't want you going to work. And she had, her stomach was hurting. She goes, I have a bad feeling. And she kind of threw a fit, and she goes, fine, I'll stay home. Well, he was a machinist. He worked in this machine shop. Well, that day a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams, and the cable snapped, and it flattened the machine shop like a pancake and killed everybody in it.
Wow.
And he would have been there. Well, you think he would have been somewhat grateful? What he did is this increased his fear of her abilities, and he had her involuntarily committed to a mental institution. And
Wow.
my dad, I remember he and my mom telling me how in the middle of the night these guys in white jackets literally came and forced her into a straitjacket, and she screamed, and my dad wanted to help, and the brother-in-law, his idiot brother-in-law, blocked him, and they took her to a mental institution and subjected her to electroshock therapy for 6 months.
Wow.
And they said when she came out, she was a shadow of what she had been, and she never talked about seeing the future or spirits again. And so now I understand this. And so the thing is, psychics and mediums have been persecuted throughout the centuries. In Middle Eastern countries, many of them were still executed. In this country, despite the fact that people are studying us, and I've been studied and tested and stuff, people still don't believe us. You have the people that say they're skeptics, but they're not really skeptics. They're just closed-minded and
Right.
refuse to believe in anything. And then you have the religious nuts that are like, well, the book of Deuteronomy says, this is evil. And it's like, yeah, well, the book of Deuteronomy says I need to put my neighbor to death for working on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
come on, and
Don't take it too literal.
by genocide and slavery and every other ill that has come down the pike.
Exactly.
And with all respect, I respect people's religions. But I have a problem when people use religion to justify anger, bigotry, hatred, and violence, and people who get not righteous but self-righteous and feel that they have the right to judge everybody else. There's people say, "Well, I don't need to do, I don't need your services as a medium." It's like, fine, I didn't say you did, but there are many people who want to hear from their loved ones, and people say, well, I don't believe you. It's like, yeah, well, I don't have to do this. I mean, I could just practice law, but this is a calling. And for me, it is what I am here to do, and I do my best to convey messages transferred from loved ones in spirit to my clients here. And I don't seek to convert anybody or convince anybody. And I like something, I believe it was St. Thomas Aquinas said, for those who believe, no proof is necessary, and for
Right.
those who do not, no proof may be
Is
possible.
enough. Yep. That's something that we say in the UFO community, also, by the way, for non-believers of UFOs. And you know,
And
it's
how can
funny.
you not believe there's life on other planets? I mean,
You know,
let's just do the
infinite
math.
space, infinite space. Not only that, the Vatican has come forward saying, "Oh yeah, yeah, aliens are real. Most likely they're out there, and is all part of God's plan," which it would be.
Well, for the past
Why
better
would
part
it
of
not
the
be?
past 2,000 years, the Vatican has been a repository of knowledge the world over.
Yeah.
I'll bet they know something a lot of people don't know. And I've talked to a number of people who have seen UFOs, including family members. And I've talked to, and I'm sure you have as well, talked to people
Oh
who
yeah.
have been abductees or claim to have been abductees.
Oh, I've interviewed the most famous abductee, Travis Walton.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's become a friend over the years. Very, very, very nice man. I'm talking about just a genuinely nice, humble person. I cannot say a bad word about the man. I really couldn't.
Yeah, and unless you're a complete nut, why would you make something like that up?
Oh, let me tell you, that story has not only turned his life upside down from the very beginning. We're talking about a guy who did not profit from it like some people will go on lecture tours and write books and make movies. He wrote a book, didn't make a whole lot of money. He worked in the same place from the moment the abduction happened till recently, a couple years ago, where he retired after almost 30 years of working there. So you're talking about a guy who worked in the same plant, did the same routine every day, even after this thing happened to him, passed lie detector tests. He does not want to be bothered with this kind of thing. He does what he does now because he has no choice. It's either he tells a story or somebody's going to butcher it, like they did the movie they made about him. By the way, that was a complete butcher job, that movie. None of the stuff you see in there, especially the alien abduction part, is all fake, all Hollywood, and he'll be the first one to tell you. It's amazing though. One thing that gets to me though, Mark, dealing with the alien phenomenon and dealing with abductees, how many of them come back saying that there's a spiritual link to the aliens, and there's a spiritual message from the aliens, and they're spiritual beings. It always goes back almost to that with a lot of the abductees that I've interviewed, where it almost seems like it all is interconnected somehow. And it goes back to me talking about even on this show months ago, where I talked about how my theory has always been that yeah, aliens are the same thing as ghosts, demons, leprechauns, all kind of things that we've misidentified over the past thousands of years. Because a couple thousand years ago, if an alien ship lands on whatever piece of land that there is, and some locals see the aliens, they're going to think of them as gods. They're not going to know any better. They don't know what aliens are. They see a being coming in that looks like a praying mantis. They're going to look at it as a demon. And now we know them as greys. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it's the perspective of the population that are having the encounters or the abductions that changes, and that's why the definition of these things change over the years. But I think it's all interconnected. Even Travis said that there was almost a psychic link between him and the human-looking aliens, which were on the ship as well. Which the movie didn't cover that either, by the way. But what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think there is a connection? Because of course the Bible talks about the Nephilim, the giants that came from space. All that stuff is kind of covered in the Bible. So I do believe that all of it is interconnected. And it is, a lot of it comes from space. A lot of it, religious-wise, a lot of the teachings, a lot of the stories might have an outworldly, out-of-earth, origin to them.
It's entirely possible. I mean, I keep an open mind on that particular subject matter because, well, where I live in Central Florida is near the Space Center,
Right.
and my dad, who was one of the guys, he was in the room back in, oh gosh, it had to have been late 1915. I would guess it would be in 1960, 61. And he was working for a defense contractor, aerospace, and the the program manager walked in and said, "Look, the president's going to be making a speech later in the week that we're going to go to the moon by the end of the decade, and you guys are part of the guys who are going to figure out how to do it." He's talking about, JFK making the
Right.
speech that we're going to go to the moon. And my dad was involved in the space program. He was also on the team of guys that helped figure out how to bring Apollo 13 back. And just listening to his stories when I can get him talking about them is really great. But he's adamant about one thing. He said, Mark, the greatest leap in electronics in the 20th century, he said, was the transistor. I go, really? He goes, yeah. And he said, something happened in New Mexico in the late 1940s. I go, okay. And
Yeah.
he said, the rumors in the industry is something crashed. And he said that Upjohn and Lockheed,
Lockheed Martin.
Boeing, yeah, now
Yep.
it's Lockheed Martin. Back then it was Lockheed, and it was Martin
Right.
Marietta at the time, and Morton Thiokol. They were all called in, and he said they got ideas from whatever it was. And he said, I remember being a young guy, and they took me to this lab, and they were growing silicon chips. And he said, how is it that we're growing silicon chips? And he said they looked at him and said, well, that's classified. And he goes, something happened out there. He goes, growing silicon chips. He goes, we went from using tubes to silicon chips within a couple years. He goes, where did that leap in technology come from? And it is so cool to listen to him talk about that. And he's a firm believer in life on other planets. But my dad said, and I don't know if he's joking, his theory is that all these other races dumped all their criminals and mentally insane on Earth, and that would certainly explain why we
Actually,
behave the way we do.
it's funny. That's the ideology of Scientology. That's what they believe. They believe that there was an alien named Xenu who came to Earth thousands of years ago when man was still kind of Neanderthal man, monkey man, and he brought with him thousands and thousands of criminals from all over the galaxy. These different looking alien beings, and they were all frozen in carbonite, like Count Solo kind of. And he came to Earth, dropped all these bodies in a volcano, because that's what you do to defreeze them, right? Drop them on a volcano, and then his ship, just out of coincidence, was equipped with a soul catching device. So when the bodies melted and their souls left the bodies, the soul catching device grabbed all these souls, collected them, and then put them through brainwashing techniques, which showed them religious stuff like Jesus, the Bible, Seinfeld. I don't know what kind of stuff they were teaching them, but it put them through all the rigors that they needed to be put through, and then they released the souls to inhabit man, and that's where we are now. We're the descendants of aliens or criminals, kind of like Australia, but on a bigger scale, in a sense.
You
That's
know,
Scientology for you.
uh, interesting. But on the other hand, the founder of Scientology was a science fiction
Sci-fi
writer.
yeah,
So,
and a child molester. Then there's that.
but it's a good story, nonetheless, and a
It
lot
made
of
for
very
it made for a
intelligent.
great.
Well, a lot of very intelligent, influential people are Scientologists. So
Yeah.
I try to I try to keep an open mind and not dismiss anyone's belief because we have to respect other people's beliefs.
And it also made for a great episode of South Park, by the way. You should watch that episode.
Yeah,
Incredible stuff. Incredible stuff. By the way, guys, we're live with Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer. We're going to open lines within the next couple minutes. If anybody wants to call in and get a reading or ask him any questions about what we've been talking about tonight, please do so. The number is 786-245-8127. And if you could look us up on Skype, please do so. It's PSN Radio right on Skype. So if anybody has any questions whatsoever, or if you want to get a reading by Mark, feel free to call in and we'll take your call. Until then, though, jumping back into what we've been discussing here, the whole psychic phenomenon, like I said, intrigues me immensely. It really does. In my own family, Mark, and I've never discussed this with you, and I haven't discussed this much on the show either, I do have a stepmother who is psychic. And she does tarot card readings, and I've had readings by her. And it's always been very bizarre, to say the least, to sit there and have your stepmother do a psychic reading for you. Very strange, but she's nailed so many different things when doing readings, which make it even stranger for me, because now I'm looking at a person who's like, Jesus, hitting on all these points. And I've had people who have told me in the past also, well, there's a strategy behind it. It's a certain way the psychics do it. It's all fake. It's all hokey. And there's a whole strategy behind it, and they do this and that. They kind of explain what the strategy is, what psychics do. How much of that do you buy? Do you think there's a lot of fakers out there in the psychic community who use a certain strategy
Yes,
to
I
give
do.
readings?
Yes, I do. In fact, I was interviewed by NBC in Miami. There was the Marks family trial, and they were members of the Roma culture, which are more commonly known as gypsies. Now, let me say that I do not believe that all the people of the gypsy culture are part of this, but there's a sector that preys upon people. And in fact, I was doing a reading for a woman recently, and she said, "Is there an evil spirit attached to my aura? Because this woman, Madam So and So, said there was." And I said, "No." And I go, "Let me guess. She told you that there's a curse upon you and your family, and that you need to come three to four times a week so that she can help separate this negative energy from your aura." She goes, "Oh my God, how do you know that?" I go, "Because that's a scam." Okay, a legitimate psychic does not tell you that you need to come back next week and the week after. In fact, three times a week, and it's only $500 per session.
Oh, that's
And
nothing.
well, the thing is, though, with the Marks trial, the Marks family built about 30 different people out of almost $30 million,
Wow.
including a famous author, Jude Devereaux, um, who whose son had her little boy had been killed, I believe, in a car accident, and they had her convinced that his soul was somehow in peril from demons or whatever mythological nonsense they were cobbling up, and they built her out of like $3 or $4 million because they do prey upon people. So for the listeners who are in need of or seeking advice from a psychic or a medium, if the psychic or the medium talks about curses and tries to get you to come multiple times within a week, you really need to turn and run, okay? Because that is a scam, and they will prey upon your fears and things like that. Now, a legitimate psychic or a medium, you'll do a session. I've got this one client that keeps asking for another reading, and I keep refusing because she doesn't want to make up her own mind. And part of our life lessons, we have free will, and we have to learn how to make up our own mind. And you can't pass off your decision making authority and ability onto spirits. You need to make up your mind. Now, spirit communication is, in my perspective, used for healing and resolution. It can be used as guidance, but it is not a substitute for you determining the course and direction of your own actions, being responsible for your own actions, and you being in charge of the direction of your own life. Because spirits are not here to do that for you. You are here to do that for you.
Now, when we talk about spirits, when you have a client in front of you, do you literally have like the spirit appear next to the person? Do you hear the voice? Do you visually see them? I mean, how does that part of it work?
Good question. All the above. Everything I do as a
Okay.
medium involves frequency. And so when I open up the frequency, it's like I'm a radio, and all of a sudden I turn on and I tell the other side, the spirit realm, okay, I'm doing this now. And spirits will come forth. First I'll get a gender, then I may get an idea of the connection to the person. If they're on your level, it's like a brother, sister, cousin, spouse, friend. Above your level, parent, aunt, uncle. Below that, child, niece, nephew. They don't have to be related to you to communicate. In other words, a person on the mother level could be a mother-in-law, stepmother, or even a teacher from school, that sort of thing. The way I see them is in my mind's eye. Like right now, if you think of a lion, do you see a lion? Because today's National Lion Day. Okay, if you see a lion in your mind's eye, do you see that?
I see that. Yeah.
That's how I see them. So it's like a vivid memory. Now I can
Mm.
see them like standing in the room. That's what's known as objective clairvoyance, because that means that I'm visualizing it the image, the vision, external to my body, and that other people can see it. Generally, I
Gotcha.
receive things through subjective clairvoyance, which is in the mind's eye. Then I will hear things like thoughts in my head. I might hear music or various sounds. I will feel sensations flowing throughout my body. I can generally feel how the person died. So it comes to me in several different ways. It's a fascinating experience, although it's very draining at the same time.
I can
But
imagine. Have you ever had an entity that is so attached to the person who is just trying to get their questions out, or their whatever the message is to that person so badly that they're almost like yelling it at you for you to hear them, or they're aggressive?
spirits communicate from the other side like they did when they were here. And a
Okay.
funny story, I was doing a reading for these folks, and their son came through, and I kept hearing the F word a lot, you know, and they said, "What are you holding back, Mark?" And I said, "Well, this is what he said." And they started laughing. I go, "Why is it so funny?" And the mother rolled her eyes and she goes, "Our son was in the Marine Corps, and every noun seemed to have that adjective in front of it." And the father goes, "Well, now we know it's him." And the thing is, if he'd just come through like, "I'm in heaven, ha 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 ha," and strumming a harp or whatever, and they don't strum harps, that's all, medieval nonsense. But then that would be contrived and fake.
Right.
Spirits bring elements of their personality with them. Now, if they were mentally ill or physically ill, they will reference those things and project images of that and sensations of that to me, but they are no longer suffering from those. And many times that's why I'll get like the cause of death, and then they'll show me or give me this beautiful sensation, feeling about what's going on with them now.
Now that's interesting. Have you ever had a spirit who has had like a really, I don't know, like I would say a horrible death, and they came back just trying to explain what happened and trying to find out what happened to them, and maybe they're confused and they still don't even know they're dead. Has that happened before?
Well, they know they're dead.
Okay.
They know what happened to them. I mean, in my book, Never Letting Go, I talk about. There's a chapter I say sometimes they need our help. Um, I was called to a department store one time by the manager, and he said, "Look, it was an arts and crafts kind of store." He goes, "In the woodworking section, the employees are freaked out." I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "They see shadows and they hear things and they get cold chills." And I go, "Could you check it out?" And the guy was really cool, and I was like really surprised that he'd asked. So I'm walking around there, and all of a sudden I start getting this tingly sensation, and I got an image, and I saw this guy that looked like a construction worker wearing the hard hat and a flannel shirt, but he had like these lamb chop sideburns, like he'd stepped right out of the age of Elvis, in the '70s, and he zoomed right up to me, and I said, "You're dead." And he kind of nodded, and I said, "You need to leave." And he kind of nodded, and he pixelated, and then that was it. And I go, "I think everything's fine." And the manager's like, "Well, that's it? Like, you don't have to, like, jingle bells or burn incense or chant or something?" And I was like, "Well, no, I don't." And I got a call from him about a month later, and he says, "I don't know what you did." He said, "But the employees are no longer afraid of that area." And I said, "Just out of curiosity, when was that building constructed?" And he said, "I'm not exactly sure, but I think it was sometime in the '70s." And
Hmm.
so I believe that this may have been a construction worker who had been killed there. Now, the ghost people are like, "He was trapped between wood," and all. It's like, well, I don't believe that. They know when they're dead. Sometimes it needs to be brought to their attention, possibly, or you have to realize that the other side has no time in the way that we can even begin to understand it.
Right.
And so 30, 40, 50 years to us, for a spirit, may be just moments.
Right.
And that's an ongoing discovery. In fact, in my new book, which is coming out early next year, Evidence of Eternity, I discuss the timelessness of time and the levels of the other side and the scientific and physiological basis that enables us to communicate with spiritual entities. I don't look at this as hocus pocus or magic or anything negative. I look at this as frequency transfer, and it's based on our physiology and on sound scientific principles. Now, the fact that it has not been reproduced in a laboratory or a device like Thomas Edison wanted to create means very little, because at one time radio waves were merely a theory, 150 years ago, and now, everywhere you go, there's radios.
Radio waves everywhere. Yeah, exactly.
Everywhere.
Mark, we have a caller on the line. Alex has joined the call. I believe he has a question. Maybe he has a reading. Alex, you're on the air with Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer. Welcome to the show, man.
Yeah. Hi, Jekyll. How you guys doing?
Good. How you doing, Alex?
I'm doing good. Mr. Anthony, is it true that you are in fact a psychic?
That he is.
That I am.
Interesting. I was wondering if you can answer, if you don't mind, if you can answer a few questions, just kind of see if you can kind of
Is this
convince me. Convince me. Yeah, convince me.
I don't really do that. Can we go to another caller?
You're over this? Oh, that's really disappointing.
No, I don't. It's like here, jump through this hoop of fire. It's like, no, I don't. I'm sorry, with all due respect, Alex. I don't play test the psychic, and also, with all due respect, when you come on with an attitude like that, even if I was trying to connect with a spiritual entity, you're going to be emanating so much negativity. Not necessarily that you're intending to do it.
I mean, you could blow me away.
That sets up a negative energy barrier. So I'm respectfully, I'm gonna pass.
All right, it's disappointing to hear, but I respect your opinion, and you guys have a good night. And it's a good show. I've been listening to most of it. It's a really interesting show. So,
thank you, Alex.
Yeah, great show. But you guys take care and keep rocking on.
Thank you, bro. Well, there you go. That's the first caller. Great caller so far, huh? Not too bad.
Well, what it is, people do that. It's like, well, I'm going to play test psychic. You got to ask a couple questions. You got to do this. And what it is,
you must get that all the time, though.
I'm
pretty sure you do.
And he sounds like a nice guy and all that, but there are people that no matter what you say, they're going to take issue and pick it apart and do this. And quite frankly, I have better uses of my time. I want to help people that want a genuine connection with the other side, as opposed to, all right, I'm thinking of a number, tell me what it is. Well, winning lottery number.
Give me the lotto numbers right now, Mark. Come on, just spit it out to me.
It's not to be used like that. It's not that I haven't asked. If you want to give me winning lottery numbers, then I certainly will take them, but that's not what it's for. Okay.
No, I hear you.
And then there's a lot of people that have a fundamental misunderstanding about what it is that I do. A psychic, all mediums are psychics, not all psychics are mediums. And a lot of people want me to be a fortune teller to forecast their future and their love life and their career and answer questions about, what's going on in their home life and so on and so forth. Now, I can do that to an extent, but my specialization is communication with spiritual entities, which has to be approached with reverence and respect. And if it's not done that way, if you have someone coming in, come on, read me, immediately there's a negative energy barrier. Okay, so once you have a deflector shield up, then it's like I got to spend time figuring out how to get the shields down, and that's essentially just a waste of energy.
You could take a ship, and there's a little corridor. It's a little tiny corridor you could fly right into. You shoot one little laser, it goes right into this little area and blows the whole thing up.
And blows
just
up
like the Death Star. And I think Alex just hit that button and just made you blow up. He blew up the Death Star.
Well, it's on a one-on-one, I'd be happy to work with him, but I'm not gonna play games.
No, I hear you. Now, but let me ask you though: have you gotten any psychic impressions at all of me by talking tonight to me?
Not really, because I'm focused on what we're doing as opposed to trying to read you.
Gotcha. So no spiritual entities have approached
when you're in court, or you bombarded by spirits. Let me tell you something. Being in court is stressful, and I'm really focusing on what I'm doing and what I've got to say. And I got a client that's like flipping out because nobody's ever happy going to court. And what it is, when I do a reading, I go into the alpha state. Okay, and when you go into the alpha state, I got to open up and I got to make a connection. Okay, so there you have it.
Is it? Well, explain to me the alpha state, because that's
Oh, I'm
above
sorry.
my
I'm sorry.
knowledge barrier.
Yeah. We
Explain
have
to us what that
different
means.
brainwave frequencies. The beta state is what we're in now.
Okay.
It's the conscious aware state. Then as you drift off into sleep, you go from beta into alpha. And then when you go into deep sleep, you go from alpha to theta. And then it is believed that on the alpha-theta border is where psychic activity occurs. Well, that's why so many people have dreams where loved ones come and speak to them, and it's a very clear and coherent discussion. That's because it's not a dream, it's actually a visitation and a direct connect to the other side. Now, for some reason, people like me can go into that state voluntarily and while conscious. Okay? And that's what we don't understand, because everyone's capable of a mediumistic experience, but not everyone is a medium. It's like everybody can hit a golf ball, but not everybody's going to be Tiger Woods.
Right. And well, I wish I was like Tiger. I mean, all those beautiful women, all the money, fame, glory, but nobody's like Tiger.
I'd even put up with the meltdown for the money.
I'm saying, so good that life he lives, and it's funny because people are on the radio, especially I listen to a lot of sports radio, and when he was going through all the troubles and all the stuff with the women and everything was coming forward, you hear the sports guys are saying, "Poor Tiger, look at the stuff he's going through." I'm like, "Poor Tiger, look at the stuff he went through. Those are all gorgeous women. Are you kidding me?
Well,
poor Tiger, poor me. That's not me. I want that life."
Look at poor people, what they go through. You know? And you don't need a couple $1 million in CNN recording it. You can have cancer and nobody could care less. Okay? And that's by far worse than, his things. And granted, it was embarrassing and all that, but that was a voluntary decision that he made. People who get cancer, they didn't decide to have that. Or people that lose a loved one, and that's what my work, my book Never Letting Go is about, is helping people cope with the loss of a loved one. And spirit communication is an important therapeutic step in the journey through grief. That's what Never Letting Go also helps you to recognize the contact with spirits very subtly. And with respect to the caller Alex, spirit communication, and this is for his edification, spirit communication is very subtle, and it may take a little bit of time to figure it out. It's not texting or instant messaging where somebody rapid fires a bunch of questions, and it's like...
It's not Instagram. No.
It's not Instagram. It's not the train seal at the circus. Here, jump through fire. That's not...
I think Alex meant well, but Alex, he just came forward a little too
I understand,
aggressive.
but I've had people, prove it. It's like, Jesus being brought before Herod Antipas, who said, "Perform a miracle that I will believe you are the Son of God." Look, Jesus could have turned water into wine right in front of Herod Antipas. He was going to have him crucified one way or the other, according to that story. And the fact of the matter is, there are some people that you're not going to persuade because they want their immediate gratification. Yeah. Now, I'm going to tell an interesting story. This happened to me about 2 weeks ago. I was doing a reading for a woman, and her mother's spirit came through, and I kept hearing the name Janet. And the client said, "Wow, my mother's best friend is Janet, and she's still alive, and I haven't talked to her for about a year." I said, "I'm feeling pain and pressure in my eyes. There's something about Janet's eyes that your mother wants to call to her attention." Now, I could have given a message like that to Alex. "Oh, makes no sense. That's blah, 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 blah." Okay. Well, a week later, I get an email from the client, who, by the way, I found out after the reading, it was a PhD and involved in near-death experience research, but she didn't tell me any of this, okay? So she called Janet, and she goes, "Janet, this is going to sound really nutty, but I talked to this medium, and he said my mom came through and said there's something going on with your eyes." And Janet said, "That's interesting, because my eyes have been feeling very strange and a little bit painful recently, or just not right." So she goes to the eye doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you're here." She goes, "Why?" He goes, "You're in the early stages of macular degeneration. And if we did not catch this right now, and you waited another 6 months for your yearly eye exam," he goes, "chances are it would have been irreversible and you would go blind." Now, I had no idea of the enormity of the message because I'm just a conduit that information comes through. I convey information to people, and what they do with it is up to them. And thank God that this client figured she should call Janet, and that Janet, in turn, went to the eye doctor.
A great story. Folks, we're almost out of time. Mark, it's been just a pleasure having you on. The book, again, it's called Never Letting Go. It's on Amazon. You can find it everywhere, right? Anybody
It's Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's on Walmart.com. It's at all fine bookstores. It's on sale in every country where English is spoken. And if you go to my website, neverlettinggo.com, it'll take you to the page where you can read about it. You can watch the video about the book, and you can order the book. And it's been a very humbling experience. I've received to date probably about 120 letters and emails from people who said they were going to commit suicide.
Wow.
Until they read Never Letting Go, because their grief was so overwhelming, and this really helped them. And it's being recommended by hospices and grief counselors all over the world.
Well, I'm going to actually order a copy this week. I haven't read the book yet, I will admit, but I am ordering a copy. I'm personally, I don't know if you've picked up on this at all, but I'm actually going through something very similar, and I think this book could help. My mother's ill. She's got terminal cancer, and we're going through the process of what she's dealing with. This is actually going to be something I'm going to invest in, because I think it might help in my own personal grieving with what's inevitable with her condition. But it sounds like a great book. You've been a fantastic guest. Sorry about the whole thing with Alex. I don't think he meant bad, but I think he just didn't understand how to properly approach you. Hopefully we can have you back on in the future, and we can have more callers with. And next time you come on, it'll be open lines from the very beginning. I do this all the time when I have a guest on for the first time. I like to hog the first hour and just get the interview out of the way. So next time you will have open lines during the entire show, and hopefully we'll get flooded with good calls. Mark, it's been just a pleasure having you on, and we definitely have to have you back on as soon as possible.
Super.
Thank you so much.
Right,
and also, real quick, we have here the website healgriefwithbelief.com. That's also one of your websites, right? I wanted to give that out as well.
Yes, Heal Grief with Belief and neverlettinggo.com all point to the same page.
Awesome. Yeah, I had that URL, so I wasn't sure. Perfect, guys. Check those websites out. Check the website out. Buy the book. We're going to have Mark on again in the near future, and we'll talk some more with Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer. Mark, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on tonight.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless. Have a good night.
Good night.
All right, everybody. That was Mark Anthony. Again, look, whether you believe him, you don't believe him, whether you're on board with what he was saying or not, you make up your own mind. That's what we do here. We present information. We interview the guests, and then you decide if you want to believe their story, their claims. Unfortunately, I don't think Alex is going to be a believer of Mark Anthony anytime soon. But Alex, you did come in a little aggressive on that question, my friend. And I'll talk to you in private about how psychics don't work like the way you thought they did. Anyway, guys, we're all out of time. We got to rush off of here. Up next, The Outer Edge is going to be live right here on PSN Radio with your host, Mike Mott, and Tim Schwartz, the Schwarzenegger. They're going to be on live, so stick around for some of that. Now, in leaving, I'm going to leave tonight with a very, very awesome song. I don't care what anybody says. This is from the soundtrack of Guardians of the Galaxy, Hooked on a Feeling. Love this song. Great movie. Go check it out, everybody. Till next week, peace. This is Inside the Jackal's Head.